About a month ago, when summer was just at its end, my friend Rose and I decided to go for a drive up to the mountains. I grew up nearly out of city limits and drove the mountain roads often. Rose is a newer friend in my life and had only been up in the mountains a few times. I was eager to show her how cool it was at night, especially when you're headed back to town and you can see all of the city lights as you're leaving the foothills. I love listening to creepy videos and watching scary movies, which may have been a big help for Rose and I on this particular night. We headed up in my van, a dependable '03 Toyota, who'd made the journey with me dozens of times before. There's a part where the pavement ends and the gravel road takes you deeper into the mountains. Just beside this stretch of asphalt to gravel is a stretch of dirt that people use to park their trucks and trailers. Rose and I drove by, and I noted that the pullout was empty, as was normal for this time of night. It was 10 p.m., the sun had set, and the lights with timers had all turned on in town. I'd never seen any lights up on the mountain, though. Almost every farming field on the mountains is fenced off with a locked gate that will say, private property, normally with bullet holes in the metal, to show that the owners are armed and generally pissed off at idiots that try to break into their fields. Every field in the mountains is watered with a center pivot irrigation system. Those are the long, repeatedly arched systems with metal frames and wheels that are commonly seen all over the United States' agricultural districts. I'd seen a few irrigation systems in town that have lights with timers on them, so at first I wasn't too surprised when I saw one light in a field. We'd only gone a quarter mile in by now, but then I remembered that not only had the light not been there before, it was in the wrong place. Oh, fuck, I sighed, which was probably not what Rose wanted to hear in the middle of her first nighttime mountain excursion. "What's up?" Rose asked. "Well, I know farmers are harvesting now, so I guess a light in a field makes sense, but at the same time, I've never seen that one before," I say, gesturing off to our right, where there is a very random amber light off at the edge of the field. It's dark enough that I can't see fences or any of the boulder around it, but I was familiar with the mountains to know that it was the edge of the property. I started to tap on the wheel anxiously as I was filled with mixed emotions. I was eager to keep going because the mountains were going to be beautiful in the half moon, and Rose had never seen them at night before. At the same time, my brain told me that if I'm going to listen to a few dozen hours of horror stories per month, I'd at least better get some meaning out of them. Fuck. I'm sorry, Rose. I'd keep going if those were tractor headlights, but I've never just seen one light right there, especially in that field. I've never even seen it farmed, so it wouldn't make sense to waste energy or money lighting it. Rose is amazing and didn't mind that we were turning around only a quarter mile in. We turn and head back towards the asphalt. I had no idea why, but I felt like there was a clock that had suddenly started ticking. "Hey, Rose, could you please hold the handle? I'm going to go fast enough that you might want to hold on to something. I promise we're safe." Rose silently clutched the "oh shit" handle above the passenger side of the car, and I went faster. I felt the sense that it was time to hurry up, so I did. I zoomed back towards the asphalt as fast as I dared, my sense of trepidation only intensifying when we reached the truck parking zone. There was a white truck and a flatbed trailer that had not been there less than 10 minutes before. 5, maybe 6 guys were around the truck that had its headlights on. One guy was in a UTV, backing it off the flatbed trailer so fast that I thought he was going to crash into one of his friends. I raced by, and somebody ran behind the car. I turned onto a road that would lead to a main road. "Rose," I asked while inching my way up to 70 miles per hour, "were those people there when we drove by earlier?" I just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. "No," Rose said evenly. Uh-huh, I sighed, copying her tone, even as I jumped up to 75 and glanced in my rearview mirror. As far as I could tell, they weren't following us, but we had 8 miles of straight, flat roads with no cover before we actually managed to reach civilization. Did they seem like they were in a hurry to you? I asked. There was no other traffic, so we didn't have to slow down for anyone, which helped us both remain as calm as possible. Just a bit, she laughed nervously, looking over her shoulder to check for any cars as well. Thankfully, nobody came. We drove to a crowded restaurant and sat in a car while we calmed down. We tried to think of a reason why those guys had shown up so abruptly in the middle of the night. Rose suggested that maybe their friends were camping and in trouble. All of the land in the mountains are private property, so nobody camps up there. I'm glad Rose and I left so we didn't have to find out why 6 guys decided they needed to rush up the mountain in the middle of the night. My boyfriend and I recently decided that we wanted to take the new tent we bought on its first trip. The tent was one that hooks up to your car to provide more storage space, and we were excited to try it out. We had planned a kayaking trip the next day at a kayak rental shop. It was supposed to be a nice, inexpensive outdoorsy weekend getaway. We tend to book things last minute, so all the state parks and professional campgrounds were full. This led us to a website that is essentially an Airbnb for campsites. The place we chose was a 100-acre property, just 20 minutes south of the kayak shop. Of all the sites in the area, it was described as having working bathrooms, showers, it allowed for campfires, and all the sites were car accessible. Important for a car-dependent tent, this site was also the most reviewed in the area, with 3 5 out of 5-star reviews. The area was very rural, so we didn't think much about the low number of reviews for any of the campsites. The renter was Mary, who only ever texted us updates, but seemed sweet. We start our 2-hour drive a bit later than anticipated, which put us behind the 11 a.m. time we had originally informed the host, but we tried to keep her updated with the new schedule. She just told us to let her know when we arrive at the address she sent us. We arrive at the address and are greeted with the barn from the pictures. It had string lights all over it, seemed fairly new, and just gave a nice feel to it. We sit in the car for a minute and struggle with cell service to text the host to let her know we'd arrived. 10 minutes after our text sends, a sweaty man who appears to be in his 60s pulls up in an ATV. He lets us know he's the father-in-law to Mary, and she's busy taking care of the seasonal harvest, and sent him instead. He lets us know we can take the car anywhere on the property, and offers to show us around on the ATV. My boyfriend, visibly uncomfortable, declines the offer and asks a few more questions about the woods and how far into them we were allowed to take the car. Anywhere. There are no designated campsites. We can go anywhere, and the ATV man even offers to help pull my car out if it gets stuck. We ask one final question about cell service, and he jokes that if we are from around here, we will understand that reception works better on one side of the barn than the other. I am from around here, and thought it was funny, but once he said that, I realized he didn't have any ounce of an accent for here like he should. Eventually he leaves, and we begin exploring the property on foot. The barn is nice and maintained. It was fully lit in the middle of the day, with the string lights decorating the interior too. It is insulated and has a working kitchen. The only warning we got was not to drink the water. It seemed like a place that would host small 50-guest weddings. We walk past a shed out behind the barn to get to the trails that ran through the woods. After going through a hike that my car would never have survived, we decided it might be best just to camp by a small creek. and we chose a spot on the side opposite the barn. We were still within walking distance, but we used my car as a buffer to feel a bit more isolated. We chose our spot and then go into the main town to eat and walk around. We message Mary about the fire policy, and she tells us that they will deliver a fire ring to the barn for us to take to camp. We arrived back at the barn about an hour and a half from nighttime. We drove by the barn, and the lights had been turned off. We assumed it was on a timer, as to not waste energy or money. We also noticed the fire ring had not yet been delivered. We start the grueling 30-minute setup in the sticky heat and reward ourselves with a sit in the air-conditioned car. We notice it looks like it's about to rain, so my boyfriend and I pull out a card game and wait for it to pass in the car. It only lasted about 10 minutes, but it is starting to be sunset. The tent held up nicely, so we felt okay leaving it for a second. Needing to use the bathroom, we started walking to the barn. As we cross the creek, we hear what sounds to be like someone in the shed moving things around. A bit unsettling, but I tell my boyfriend that maybe they used equipment today, and it's just sitting in there making the cracking cool-off noise that it sometimes does. We get to the barn and the lights are still off, but the fire ring is there. We go in and check to make sure the power is off and that it's not just the lights outside. None of the light switches will work, so we assume the power is cut. Again, maybe it's just on a timer, no worries. We step out of the barn and get 10 feet away, and we hear a hum in the distance to the opposite side of the shed. The power to the barn is restored. We change direction to use the bathroom. As soon as we step inside, the power cuts. I start getting a weird feeling, and I can tell my boyfriend has it too. I look to my boyfriend and say, maybe they're just watching us. I immediately follow it up with, no, that's a lot worse. We walk back outside and the lights turn on. My boyfriend says that we need to leave, and I have the same gut-wrenching primal fear. We put the ring back by the barn since we'd moved it 10 feet, and the barn lights start flickering. We briskly walk back to the car. Being from Appalachia, I know better than to run. The 30-minute setup was torn down and packed up within 5 minutes, and we jumped in the car and locked it. I managed to get my car going. Thanking God that the ring didn't get my car stuck, we start toward the driveway, and just as we made it to the road, my boyfriend looks back and sees a man standing by the shed, watching us. As soon as my car pulls off onto the road, we get a text from Mary, letting us know that the fire ring is out by the barn. She also informs us that we're welcome to stay in the barn if the rain had messed up our camping experience. We arrive at a nice hotel, willing to splurge for safety. At this point, it's 10 p.m. at the earliest. A sweet, older lady checks us in, desperation for validation and just comfort from anyone. We tell her what had just happened to us at the campsite. She looks shocked. She asks if we'd seen the news lately, to which we both respond that we had not. The lady tells us that couples in the state had been going missing. All of them had gone camping. 3 couples were truly missing, and 1 was recently found on the side of the freeway, slashed to near death. They are, to the time of posting, still recovering in hospital. We couldn't find many articles about where in the state, but the look on the lady's face suggested it was near us. We get to our room and text Mary back to tell her we're not staying. "Thank you for staying with us," she responded. We lock the door, and I break down into tears. I will not forget that feeling I got at the barn. The primal fight-or-flight feeling, and the feeling of being watched. I feel it in my throat just writing this. I never want to experience that again. So, to the man by the shed who watched us drive away, let's never meet. I've read that you learn your temper from one of your parents. I learned mine from my father. My mother used to gunny sack. That is, she rarely lost her temper, but when she did, she would toss out everything at me that I'd done in the last year that made her angry. Otherwise, at the time, you wouldn't know that she was upset. My father, on the other hand, would let you know immediately that your behavior was objectionable, and if you knew what was good for you, you would stay out of arm's reach. Outside the house and the other side of town was best. I'm afraid that my temper most resembled my father's. You knew when I was pissed off, and I didn't mind telling you all about it. My temper sometimes got me in trouble, but in this story, I have no doubt it saved me. I'm a female, and back in the mid-70s, I was 20 and living in California, going to college full-time while working part-time at the West Covina Fashion Plaza. Being but a lowly wage slave, I had to park on the outskirts of the parking lot to allow paying customers the parking spots closest to the entrances. I didn't mind, as I was fit and enjoyed the walk. Late one evening after work, I didn't just walk to my car, but angrily stalked. I was seething. My manager had just told me that I'd been passed over for a job in the office. It was a position that paid more, and I wanted it. As I look back now, it would have been too difficult for me to work full-time and keep up with my college curriculum too. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking of that. I hadn't blown my temper inside, but took it with me outside as I rapidly strode through the lot towards my car, turning over the many injustices done to me and my mind. I knew my office skills were better than who they picked, and I was not happy, to put it mildly. My long legs took me to the edge of the lot and up into the parking garage in short order. I had parked up on the 4th level on the open-air top of the parking structure. Because I'd stayed behind after, we closed at 9 p.m. There were few people about. It was now about 9:30 or so, and the parking garage was empty enough that I was able to walk in the middle of the ramps up towards my car. I vaguely remember passing a woman getting into her car on the 2nd level, but no one after that, except for a man walking a ways behind me. The distance between us seemed to close by the 3rd level, and as I shot out at the doorway up onto the 4th floor, he seemed closer still. I was not at all afraid. At this point in my life, I was a dancer and in great condition. I had confidence. I was pretty with my glasses on, and beautiful enough without them that, walking to my car in Los Angeles in my dance costume one day, I had caused one man to jump the curb in his car, and another to walk into a lamppost. I had more than my share of male attention, so, to any degree that I thought of the man behind me at all, I assumed it was just someone who was following me to make a pass. And boy, did he have the wrong woman. My little parking lot walk hadn't begun to take the edge off of my anger. I was still seething. I was in no mood to be trifled with. And this guy was some idiot if he couldn't see that this was no time to be pitching a lost cause. So, as I took out my keys and I could hear his steps speed up behind me, I turned around 180 degrees in place as I walked without breaking stride, dance training, and addressed him in a short word. What? I admit that if I hadn't been so worked up, I would have been more polite. I might have said, "What do you want?" or "Can I help you?" In fact, I am 100% certain that I didn't say to him, "What do you want?" with emphasis on the what, but by turning around so abruptly to face him, I took him by surprise. His face, just a couple of yards away from mine, turned abruptly from a leer to surprise to frozen, and as his face changed, his body made an awkward stiff turn away. A couple more mechanical turns later, he had walked away, back through the 4th parking level door. That was odd, I thought. My mind did not really on what had just happened. I walked the few strides over to my car, unlocked it, warmed up, and drove off. I saw the man lurking around some cars on a lower level. I had the vague impression he was hiding. I continued fuming about my situation and didn't get over it until later that night at home, where I proceeded to call a friend to dissect what had happened. I did think to add in the strange incident with the man afterwards. It was my friend, Patty, that pointed out to me that I could have been hurt. I laughed it off. Ha, that guy, implying he was lucky to have gotten away so easily. About a month or so later, I heard that some guy was following women to their cars and assaulting them in the parking lot. The Fashion Plaza was trying to keep it hushed up, but female employees were scared and started parking closer to the entrance and walking with each other to their cars, or being picked up by their boyfriends or husbands. I didn't discuss the odd encounter with anyone or ask, "Do you think that might have been him?" I didn't think of him at all. He hadn't threatened me or even said anything. About a month after that, a slim man was picked up and later convicted of the sexual assault, as he used a knife to threaten his victims. Since I'm slow about these things, it wasn't until about that time that I began to realize that this slim young man, who thanks to my temper, did not assault me. I was surprised, then felt a bit guilty. If I had only realized just how odd this person's behavior was, I could have given his description to the police. But everything that night had taken a back seat thanks to my anger. Maybe it was because of that encounter that he thought to bring a knife with him the next time. I came to see that it was the Fashion Plaza's fault for not letting the employees know what was going on and coordinating with the police. In fact, I understand that some of the victims sued the plaza and, in the end, we parked wherever we wanted. But by that time, I had another job, so it didn't matter. I'm sure there will be people who never felt that level of confidence or burned with such a hot temper who wouldn't believe my story. But I guarantee it's true. Anyone who knew me back then would never doubt it. Unfortunately, when I looked online to find details, the incident in the West Covina Fashion Plaza in the mid-70s has been lost and overlooked by fresh and newer assaults. The moral of the story seems to be, sometimes it's good to lose your temper. This happened about 10 years ago, and I've only told maybe 3 people the full version. I don't know why it's still so vivid. I guess because it scared the absolute hell out of me in a way nothing else has since. So, for a bit of background, I grew up in a really small town in northern Georgia, like one gas station kind of town. If you've ever driven through the area near the Blue Ridge Mountains, you know the vibe. Lots of old forests, misty hills, and train tracks that look like they haven't been used in decades, even though they still rumble with freight trains a few times a day. I lived on the outskirts, not quite in the woods, but not suburban either. The last house before the trees start swallowing up the landscape. My best friend at the time, Caleb, lived maybe 3 miles from me, deeper into the woods. We'd walk to each other's houses all the time, especially in the summer when school was out and nights lasted forever. The fastest way to his place was by cutting through the woods and following this old train track that cut diagonally through the hills. There was a longer road route, but it added like an hour and nobody had a car yet. So if we wanted to hang out at night, the tracks were the way. I'd done that walk probably 100 times without a problem. Yeah, it was creepy sometimes, especially when fog rolled in or you heard animals in the brush, but nothing ever happened. Until this night. It was mid-July. I remember because it was hot as hell, even after dark. I had just gotten off the phone with Caleb. This was back when flip phones were still a thing. And I had this dinky little one with no flashlight. And he asked if I wanted to come hang out and play Halo or something. I told him I'd be there in half an hour. So I grabbed a flashlight, a beat-up little mag light that barely illuminated more than a few feet in front of me. Told my mom I was headed out and started walking. By the time I hit the tracks, it was already pitch black. No moon that night, or if it was there, it was buried behind cloud cover. And when I say dark, I mean dark. The kind where your own breathing sounds too loud, and the forest feels like it's just watching you. The only thing keeping me oriented was the gravel under my feet, and the faint shimmer of the metal rails catching my flashlight beam every now and then. Maybe 20 minutes in, I started hearing movement off to my left. It could have been anything: deer, raccoon, or even a possum. Nothing unusual. Still, I stopped walking, trying to hear more clearly. Whatever it was, it stopped too. I stood there for a while, holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. Nothing. So I chalked it up to my imagination and kept going. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Gravel under boots. And then, bam. Something huge crashed through the trees off to my left again. I whipped the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing but darkness. Whatever it was moving, fast. It felt like it was pacing me. I froze. It froze. I took a single step forward, and whatever it was bolted. It sounded like it ran across the tracks, maybe 10 feet ahead of me. I heard the gravel spray underfoot, and this loud, sharp exhale, like a snort, but deeper, heavier. The air went cold around me. I'm not making that up. It was like the forest had been holding its breath, and suddenly, it was breathing on me. I stood there for what felt like hours, probably a minute or two in reality. I couldn't move. I couldn't even bring myself to look around, just stared dead ahead, hoping the beam of my flashlight would reveal something I could understand. But there was nothing. No eye shine, no outline of an animal, just trees and fog and dark. Eventually, I heard it again, but further off this time, crunching back through the woods on the right side now. Then silence. I ran. I don't remember running exactly. Just the sensation of gravel flying and sweat pouring down my back. I didn't stop until I was at Caleb's house, banging on the door like a maniac. He opened it immediately and said, "Dude, are you okay?" Because I guess I looked like death. I told him something had followed me through the woods, something big. He laughed at first, thinking I was messing with him, until he saw that I wasn't joking. We stayed up all night, every single light in his place on. We didn't even touch the Xbox. We just kept looking out the window, half expecting something to be staring back. The next morning, I insisted we go back and check the tracks. I needed to know if I imagined it. We retraced my steps, and sure enough, right there where I heard it cross, the gravel was all kicked up, like something big had barreled across at full speed. There were faint impressions leading into the woods, but the ground was too hard to make out prints. It didn't look like hooves, though, not like deer tracks I've seen, just long dents. We didn't follow them. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Probably some kind of animal, maybe a deer. But bears don't usually charge people and then stop short. They definitely don't pace you from the woods without making more noise. Some nights when I'm up late, I still think about it. That snort, that feeling of being watched. I don't take shortcuts anymore. This happened during my first year of community college, and I always drove this shitty 1996 Toyota Corolla to my classes. This car was barely holding it together, and I had to replace some part that broke at least once a month. At 60 miles per hour, the whole car would start to vibrate, but I lived about 10 minutes away from campus and my job, so it got me where I needed to go. One day, I got back from one of my classes, and I noticed someone had broken into my car and misplaced all of my possessions. My registration card, homework, tire gauge, and various other objects had been thrown under my seat or stuffed in weird places. My rearview mirror had even been turned completely vertically. Nothing had been stolen, which I thought was really weird, but also glad, because I thought whoever did this was just doing it for a laugh and trying to mess with me. I started parking on the complete opposite side of campus, but it happened again with the same situation. Everything inside my car was just thrown about, and nothing was stolen. The final time this happened, I was returning to my car from class and saw streamers and confetti all across my windshield. There was a piece of purple construction paper placed under my windshield wipers that said in all caps, "We are always watching you," winky face included. Now, this was starting to really freak me out. At first, I thought this might be one of my friends playing a prank on me, so I asked all of them over the next few days if they'd been breaking into my car and messing around with my stuff. However, none of them knew what I was talking about. I know how my friends are too, and I know if I'd asked them about this, and they were indeed the culprit, they would have broke out into laughter, saying, "Dude, we totally got you." None of them knew what I was talking about, though. I told them that if this really was one of them, they needed to let me know, because if this was a stranger, I was going to have to get campus security involved. I never felt the need to get them involved any sooner, because none of my possessions had been stolen, and this felt more like a practical joke. Things started to get really weird with the confetti, streamers, and note, though. A few weeks had passed, and the pranks had stopped, much to my relief. I thought this probably had to be some strangers pulling a prank, until one night I was leaving campus after getting out of my night class. I was driving down the highway that I always took to get to my neighborhood, and noticed I was being tailgated, harder than I'd ever been tailgated in my entire life. This truck came out of nowhere and was blasting its high beams and seemed to be about a foot away from the back of my car. I was immediately freaked out and thought, to hell with the law, and booked it back to my house going 90 miles per hour down the highway. The road was pretty clear and there were no cops, and I luckily lost their tail. The following week, the same situation occurred again, leaving my night class, and this truck encountering me on the highway, blasting its high beams. I was so sick of the pranks, the stalking, and all of this nonsense, and I had finally had it with whoever was doing all this stupid shit, so I legit slowed down to about 10 miles per hour to annoy them. I didn't care that all the other cars on the road were honking and giving me the finger for going so damn slow on a highway with a speed limit of 65. I really just wanted to give whoever the hell this was a taste of their own medicine. No joke. They followed, going 10 miles per hour for what felt like 10 minutes. I couldn't understand what the hell these people were getting out of this situation. But after 10 minutes, they swerved into the lane next to us and sped off into the distance, having finally gotten sick of my own little prank. After this, my car was never messed with again, and I believe I may have encountered them only one more time on the same highway. I began to drop below 30 miles per hour, and they immediately swerved into the other lane, just like the last time they had. Then, finally, all situations of stalking and pranks had finally stopped, and I eventually moved out of my old town so I could attend the university I was transferring to. I even traded in my old Corolla for a Honda Civic in a much better condition with a different license plate. To this day, I don't know who these people were or what they wanted from me. It all could have been harmless, but the fact that I was being followed on my way home from campus made it feel like these people wanted something more from me. If I had let them follow me to my home, I have no idea what would have happened. In retrospect, I know I should have gone to campus security or the police about the situation. But after the stalking stopped and I moved away, I forgot about it for a while. Maybe it all really was just harmless pranking. But there is no way for me to be completely certain, making this an extremely creepy experience for me. For some background, I grew up in the densest region of the biggest city in South America. It's a dangerous place, to the point where I'd never met a single adult person who wasn't robbed at least a few times. You know the story that, in some places, there are lots of words to describe snow because of how prevalent it is. Well, in Brazil, there are many words to describe a robbery. One particularly common type of robbery is called arrastão, literally a great dragging. It's when a group of robbers target individuals in a much larger crowd, then suddenly scare those near the attack to make them run away. And when people see others running, scared and screaming, they also start running along, dragging the whole crowd in a single direction, hence the name. The robbers use the ensuing chaos to flee before the cops are called, so it's usually a very brief event. Usually. Back in 2009, I used to travel by subway and walk for about 10 minutes the rest of the way to college. I studied at night, and classes finished at 11:15 p.m., by which time I would take a bus to return to the subway station, because it would be too dangerous to walk this late at night. On November 10th at 10 p.m., I was in class when I noticed all the lights in the building that I could see through the windows turn off, and soon after, the lights in my building would go off as well. I didn't know it at the time, but what happened was a huge blackout that affected half of Brazil and the entirety of Paraguay for a while. Power would gradually return, but things would only get back to normal the next day, almost 8 hours later. Anyway, the generator kicked in, but our teacher dismissed the class because of the blackout. As I left, I discovered near total darkness outside. Streets were mostly illuminated by cars on the road. I went to the crowded bus stop and waited. My bus arrived very late, but eventually I reached the subway, and this is where things start to go very wrong. Because of the blackout, the subway was not operational, and there was already a very large crowd waiting for it to reopen. The building itself was powered by generators, but no one was allowed past the turnstiles until things got back to normal. This was a very warm Brazilian spring night. There was no ventilation in the building, and the conglomeration caused it to feel even warmer. The result of this is that the crowd was divided in two. One group waiting inside the hot but illuminated building, and another waiting outside in the cooler but darker night. By this point, you might have already guessed what happens. I was in the group that chose to bake instead of stand in the dark, but the larger group was outside. Suddenly, I heard a few screams, and then people started to push and squeeze inside. This made the heat almost unbearable, but soon after the commotion started, it stopped. Everything got quiet, and the crowd dispersed a little. Then it happened again. A few screams, everyone starts to push everyone else inside. Sudden quietness, unbearable heat, crowd dispersing again. This kept happening, I'm not sure how many times. I was equal parts scared and confused. I had no idea what was going on, but I overheard people talking and put the pieces together. I was already familiar with the fact this region had a lot of beggars by day turned muggers by night. They usually act alone or in small groups threatening people with shivs and small knives, or snatching phones from distracted victims. During the blackout, however, they took advantage of the large crowd and practiced the aforementioned arresto. What made this unusual is the fact the crowd could not disperse because we were waiting for the subway. No one would venture far during a blackout, and no cops would ever arrive, so it kept happening over and over again. I'm not sure if they were simply snatching phones, using knives, or both, but whatever it was, it scared those outside repeatedly. I eventually managed to call my father and asked him to drive me home. I was almost more scared when I had to walk the short distance alone to where my dad had parked the car than I was of the whole ordeal. I was lucky to have someone to drive me home, because as it turns out, the subway would remain closed for a few more hours. I can't imagine having to deal with that situation for that long. I still remember seeing an old lady waiting alone on a secluded bus stop in near complete darkness during my drive home. She was probably even more scared than I was that night. It's hard to even imagine. I also hope those opportunistic robbers got what they deserved in the end. But knowing Brazil, I highly doubt it. This happened after my first year in college. I was on summer break, and one of my favorite activities to do during summer was to go out on long bike rides. My friend Kay and I would go for 10-mile bike rides on our fun workout days. It was getting late, but I didn't like having my friend ride to her house alone since it was about a mile away from mine, so I decided to ride with her to her house. Her neighborhood was right next to mine, and actually used to be my old neighborhood. There are 2 entrances to this neighborhood, but only one if you were riding bicycles, since the other entrance did not have sidewalks to it and had many speeding cars going by it. We made our way towards the back entrance of the neighborhood and turned left towards the faster route to her house, since everything was really a large loop to the front or back entrance. We were riding in the road since not too many cars were using it, when we saw a man on a motorcycle coming towards us from the opposite direction. He waved at us, and I thought it was one of our friends from high school, so I waved back. Kay did not. I couldn't be certain if it was or not, since he had a helmet on that covered his face. He was headed towards the back entrance anyway, so I figured he was leaving the neighborhood anyway. We turned onto her street later and said goodbye. My friend's house was a few streets near the front entrance, so I was shocked as I turned off her street and headed back towards the back entrance, as the guy on the motorcycle was coming back towards where the front entrance was. He waved me down and stopped his bike off the main road in the neighborhood, and of course still thinking it was my friend, I stopped my bike near him. I was using my stepdad's bike, which was a little too tall for me, so I had to get off of it to stand. My feet couldn't really touch the ground. He took off his helmet, and it was then I realized he was not my friend. I had no idea who this even was, and I'd never seen him before. He was in his late 20s, at least, and he greeted me. "Hello there." I managed to say a quick hello back, not knowing what to do. He started talking about how nice the summer was and random stuff, while I just stood there, dumbfounded. The sun was starting to set, and it was getting late, when he suddenly asked me if I wanted a ride. I quickly refused, making the excuse that I couldn't leave my bike on the side of the road. He promised it would be quick, but I was adamant that I couldn't. He tried a few more times to convince me. I said I had to go home and wished him a good night as I rode off. He turned on his radio and drove off towards the front entrance as I was riding towards the back. As soon as I knew he couldn't see me, I started to pedal as fast as I could. Luckily, I was in really good shape back then, so I could ride my bike really fast. I felt like I was being paranoid, and that he was simply just trying to be nice, and he'd probably left the neighborhood by then. when all of a sudden, I heard his loud music. He was still a ways back from where I was. This means instead of leaving the neighborhood, he took a right going back into it, which was a longer way in the loop to get to where I was. I pedaled faster, making a plan to get to my now ex-boyfriend's house. Luckily, he lived in the same neighborhood. Instead of going straight where a long road was to the back entrance, I turned left and then right onto his street. I rushed up to his house and placed my bike out of view to where you could only see it if you were really looking. I banged on the door, afraid he would come down the street at any moment if he was following me. My boyfriend's mom opened the door, and I rushed to his room out of breath. His room was at the front of the house, so his window was pointed at the street. He saw me out of breath and asked me what was wrong, but I just crouched towards his window and peeked out of the blinds. I heard the motorcyclist's loud music coming down the street. I saw him pass slowly as he was looking around. He had seen me turn onto this street and had followed me. I told my boyfriend what happened, and he laughed and shrugged it off like it was nothing. I texted Kay, and she told me she had a bad feeling about the guy and had memorized various aspects of what he was wearing, down to the brand and color of his bike. Leave it to a criminal justice major to be able to get a read on someone she passed in just a few seconds. I was still paranoid that he would come back, so I had my boyfriend put my bike in the garage, even though the sun had fully set by now. I don't want to think of what could have happened if I decided to go straight to my house instead. He surely would have caught up with me and would have known where I lived. So, to the guy on the motorcycle, I'm glad I live many states away from you now. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story you'd like me to read on the channel, please send me an email or post it to my subreddit. You can find details of this in the video description. It's the stories that make this, and this is the best way to ensure variety in the stories I share. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my channel members and patrons who now have special access to ad-free videos and other behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you guys for listening. Have a great night.